Hello again, class. Today we're going to be going through a mini lecture of sorts that goes over many of your assignments throughout this semester. As a general understanding of how the course is structured, you can think about there being 4 quizzes that are all taken online, of course, mini reflection assignments, and then the rest of it is just papers. Again, there are no midterm or final exam you have to worry about or study for. So you can think of the quizzes as mini exams that are not meant to really be that difficult as long as you have been paying attention, have been keeping up with the lectures, the readings, and other material including podcasts, documentaries, etc. That being said, I know that a few students reached out confused as to where to find some of the multimedia materials that I have for this course, and I will go over that as well. As it says above, when in doubt, go to the Files tab. If there's anything that you are confused about, or let's say you want to read ahead, the Files tab is your friend. You can find all of the readings here alphabetically. Additionally, you can find the class media links document, which is where I basically have in one centralized location all the links that I'm requiring you to look at throughout the semester. In individual lectures, if there is a link that, for instance, I wanted you to watch while I was lecturing, I will give you that link on the YouTube video itself and also in the description. So you never really need to search around to find what you're looking for, ideally. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will try to make this online process as quick and painless as possible for everyone. So that being said, you can also find the class syllabus here, but it's also posted in the modules at the very top. So I make sure that you have seen the syllabus and ideally have also have watched the syllabus lecture. And then finally, you also will find the GEA 1, which is the general education assignment requirement that every class has. That looks a little different depending on the professor, but for me, how I'm having you do this, as opposed to doing, let's say, fieldwork in the public where you can potentially contract COVID or spread it, I'm having you watch a documentary. After you watch the documentary, per the document that you can find in the files, you are able to then reflect on what you have seen. And for instance, if you liked the film, if you thought the film taught you something you weren't aware of, that sort of thing. So make sure you also download the GEA1 requirements documents and familiarize yourself with it. The assignment is not for some time, so you have a bit, and you'll be able to choose from, at this point, 3 documentaries. If someone wants to actually pitch me a documentary to watch, I'd be willing to look at it and see if it fits the objective, basically, of the assignment. Otherwise, I might add 1 or 2 down the lane. And if you hear my cat behind me, I apologize. So again, you can find the media links document in the Files tab on Canvas, but just so you can have an idea of what you're supposed to use this document for, if you look at the syllabus, you will actually see, for instance, it'll say video, human anthropology, cultural relativism in a certain week. So make sure that you're keeping up with the syllabus and those due dates, because this will also apply to videos, podcasts, etc. that I assign throughout the rest of the semester. So you don't have to use this page necessarily, I'm just showing you what the general format is. Basically, this is just broken down into video links, which could include a YouTube video or a documentary. In the case of Intersection, which is the video that I'm going to be having you watch, the documentary film, due next week. And then additionally, I have a few podcasts here. You don't have to, and I encourage you not to do this, watch them or listen to them all at once. You should watch or listen to them when the assignment is due, so you have an idea of how it all fits together, essentially. So go through that document just to familiarize yourself with it, and if there's any questions concerning where to find something, it most likely is in that document in the Files tab on Canvas. Your first quiz is not for a few weeks, specifically the 23rd of this month, of September, if you are watching this later. And I primarily am doing this in the form of true, false, multiple choice, and short essay questions. Again, the quizzes are not supposed to be necessarily very intensive. They're just to make sure that you are understanding the material and that you've been keeping up with the material. That being said, any material covered up into that day of the quiz has the potential to be a question on said quiz. When I say up into that day, I also mean the day that it is due. So if there are readings on the same day a quiz is due, those readings are also fair game for the quiz. So make sure that you keep up with the readings and other materials. That can mean, again, documentaries, podcasts, whatever that I assign, including lectures, of course, are up for grabs for these quizzes. So keep that in mind and take good notes. The quizzes are basically open notes because it's impossible to police you right now, and I'm not going to make you be proctored, for instance. But just so you know, of course, that you must take these quizzes on your own. And any violation of that or any copy pasting from online for the essays, for instance, are grounds for plagiarism. So don't lose out on an easy A on either the assignment or the entire course because you just didn't keep up with the material and you just wanted a short fix to a problem that you probably could have avoided, essentially. So on that dreary note, we can continue. So in terms of GEA1, your documentary assignment, you will choose a film in which you will explore issues concerning systemic racism or discrimination based on sex and or gender in American society. Potentially all of the above depending on the film, especially when we start talking about intersectional issues and experiences in the US. So you will select a film, and again I have a list here of 3, but if you would like to pitch me a film that I think fits the topic, then I probably will approve it, but just run it by me and get confirmation before you get too invested into that film, basically. And also the paper, the most important part. So on that note, you will provide a concise review of the main themes of the film, the style of its presentation, and what you learned from this film that potentially impacts your view of race, racism, or other forms of discrimination in the US. I'm also providing here some additional topics of interest you may want to consider or engage with when you are writing your paper, basically things that you might find interesting or things you thought maybe could be improved about the film, because also that is part of being a critical minded scholar, being able to sort of pick through a film or a piece of document and see, okay, this was good here, but they could have improved on this, or this was terrible in this regard, and this is why. Those are valuable skills to have, not only as a scholar, but also just as an individual in the United States that is also a free-thinking member of our society. So keep that in mind. And additionally, after this documentary reflection is complete, you will submit an interview guide, either based on you wanting to interview someone on similar themes to this film, or other themes related to discrimination or inequalities in the US, which will be the next slide I will discuss. All right, so the interview plan, you can kind of think of it basically as you trying to articulate who you would like to interview, the where and the when, and the how. The how is probably the most important part. So first, you will have to submit this as a one-pager, basically at the end of your reflection paper, and it will cover themes that you want to talk about with your participant, as we call them, either about themes you found in the film of interest or themes you are just interested in related to discrimination. So for instance, you could talk about racism in the US in your film reflection, and then you maybe want to engage with discrimination based on sexuality or gender in your interview plan. That's totally fine, or they can be on the same topic, whatever you feel most comfortable doing. Additionally, also to keep in mind who you are interviewing, because they may be more willing or comfortable talking about certain topics with you also as an interviewer. Because your role as an interviewer is also to sort of elicit conversations from participants and sort of gauge if they feel comfortable on a topic or if you should push that boundary a little bit, depending on what you're trying to find, while also not being openly hostile, of course, because that can create animosity and makes interviewees less likely or less inclined to answer your questions, or they may be inclined to try to find the answer they think that you are looking for. So it's a bit of a tangent, but also very important to keep in mind. Interviews, to do them correctly, are really hard, and you can mess up really easily, so it's good to start to build up these toolkits for yourself, which you also apply to the real world. So for instance, in debates, when you are talking with other individuals that may have differing opinions than yourself, you have to be able to be articulate, but also be able to make pointed observations when you're having discussions. This is also part of interviewing. So that being said, after you find a theme that you are very interested in, or there could be multiple themes, because again, this class also is interested in intersectional topics in terms of human behavior. So for instance, how race can intersect with gender and sexuality. I say can, they almost always do. So in terms of who you can interview, on that note, you can interview basically anyone. I would prefer that they be an adult. So you can interview a friend, a relative, or a coworker, among other family members, of course. And there are additional options or sort of pitches that you can find on the physical document itself in the Files tab. In terms of how the interview is conducted, I would prefer you do this either via phone or digital, but not email. Basically, you should be able to talk to the person. You can do this in person, but I would suggest otherwise just because of COVID, of course, so keep that in mind. And if you do so, try to keep an adequate amount of distance between the two individuals and or wear a mask, as an example. So what this document really is going to entail is you basically covering all these bullets. What do you plan on talking about with your participant? So these are the sample questions, and on the document itself, I provide, I think, 8 example questions. You can pull from those, you can build upon them, you can tweak them, or you can throw them out the window and make your own. But as long as they are covering the sort of theme that you are interested in exploring is what I'm really interested in. Additionally, on this document, of course, explain how you want to conduct the interview. Is it going to be via phone? Is it going to be via Zoom? That kind of thing. Your expected timeline. Keep in mind, this assignment is not for some time, so check the syllabus and kind of just start to plan that out. And then finally, I just want to make sure that you have an idea of what it would be like to do an interview. So maybe ask the questions to yourself out loud and see if they make sense to you or if they just sound weird. But basically, you have some wiggle room here. So if you want to be able to make your own questions, feel free to do so. In terms of how many questions, I would like to see at least 8 as well. That is generally a good rule of thumb for an interview because they can get very long and participants start to dread getting asked more questions after a while. So try to keep it around 8, and if you want to keep them more open and allow them to, for instance, ask additional questions, that's fantastic. You don't have to if you don't feel comfortable doing that yet. There are different forms of interviews, and we'll get through those throughout the rest of the semester. But basically, the 2 that you should be most familiar with are called structured and semi-structured interviews. A structured interview basically just follows the script. You go from question 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. You do not deviate from that script. In terms of a semi-structured interview, you have some more space to kind of play around with the participants, the interviewee. So for instance, they start talking about something that you think is unrelated, but allow them space to sort of just let them air it out and ask them follow-up probe questions saying, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that's related to this topic? Or I didn't understand what you meant by that. Can you maybe explain further? That gives you, as an interviewer, more room to sort of say, okay, you may be going off track. How can I get you back on track? Or, hey, this is really interesting. That's something I didn't think about when I was making the interview guide. Let's explore this further. So there are different means of doing interviews, and not one is more correct than the other. It depends on your objectives. So if you feel like it is useful for you and you're not taking too much of your time or your interviewee's time, feel free to do that. Just so you know, because it is relevant to next week's topic concerning sex, gender, and sexuality, you actually are able to set your preferred pronouns on Canvas. So to do that, you can go to your settings by clicking on either your photo or the settings tab on Canvas, and then going to your pronouns. They currently have 3 options available, so I would encourage you, if you feel comfortable doing so, to set your pronouns. And hopefully you will understand why it is important to have this discussion next week at the very least, if not already. My screen might look a little bit different than yours just because I'm an instructor, but the general pieces should all be basically the same, so you should be able to find it pretty easily. If not, let me know. You do not have to do this if you do not want to. It's perfectly valid to also say you don't want to disclose your gender pronouns. But if you feel like you would like to, I would encourage you to do so, and that way it'll actually reflect it on your Canvas posts and discussions by saying, for instance, Devin Gray, and then in parentheses, he/him for my pronoun. I said this would be brief, so in the interest of not continuing on and giving you a longer lecture, I'm going to stop here. But just so you know, there is going to be no lecture on Monday. There is a holiday, and I want to honor that even in this weird online context we find ourselves in. That being said, there are 3 readings that I want you to get through. Martin, Bogle, and Vernon. Martin in particular is a very sort of seminal piece for anthropologists that deal with reproduction as a topic of interest and of research. So make sure that you read these 3 documents, and additionally, you will have to have watched the film called Intersection, which deals with a lot of topics concerning the sort of ambiguity in the American society concerning the very real difference between biological sex and gender as a social construct. Biological sex is a very messy construct itself, and you will see in the video what I mean by messy. And basically, in summary, I just want you to know that despite the very common perception that there are only 2 sexes, there are potentially many different forms of sex. The term intersex itself, sort of the film's title, is alluding to this. So for instance, there can be different combinations of XY chromosomes, or there can be XXY chromosomes. And it also depends on what scale you're looking at in terms of sex. If you're looking at the chromosomal level, that's where the X and Y's come in. That's a very different definition of sex than, let's say, your physical genitalia. So if you have a penis, you are a male. If you have a vagina, you are a female. That's like the very base definition of how people commonly consider biological sex. However, different definitions can result in different results, basically. So keep that in mind. And know that in anthropology, which I'll get into next week, there is a very real distinction between biological sex, basically the structure that you were born with, and gender, which is a construct that you enact and reproduce and in some capacities perform on a daily basis in a society, which shapes how you express and understand gender. As you are growing up, nothing in your biology says that you are a man, you must play with toy dump trucks and laser guns, to give some random examples. That's just what you were given as toys when you were growing up. There's nothing that says a girl must play with princess dolls or wear pink. That's just what they have been given as they were growing up. This shapes how we understand gender and also gender relations. This is a boy's toy, this is a girl's toy, this is a man's job, this is a woman's job. Nothing in our biology says that this is dictated in stone. It's just what we perceive and conceptualize as, okay, this is something that men do, or this is something that women do. And hopefully over time we start to see these barriers chip away more than they are already starting to do. But there are very real disparities related to gender and very common misconceptions concerning gender, which we are trying to dispel in this class, hopefully throughout the semester, given the fact that we really only have 1 class to really engage on this. But as I said on a previous lecture, I'm going to be basically engaging with this topic throughout the semester, so get used to it, basically. So, that being said, I hope you have a nice weekend, and remember, if you need to find a film, it most likely is in the document in the Files tab on Canvas.